Welcome in the latest episode of the Five on the Floor podcast on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Make sure to check out 5reasonsports.com. That is our all-free website where you can find all of the podcasts in our network, including 5 Rings Canes and 3 Yards Per Carry. But also you can find our YouTube channel, all of our merchandise, including our Tua and our Heat stuff, and all of our columns and trending news articles. Also, check out all of the sponsors in our network. They're all local. They've been supporters of us. Everybody asks, how do we support you? How do we make sure 5 Reasons keeps going? Support our sponsors. And one of them is the Gonzalez and Tybor Law Firm, and you can find them at bankruptcyisgoodforyou.com. That's right, bankruptcyisgoodforyou.com. They've got consultations available via telephone or video conference. So in addition to that website, you can also check out 954-678-8354. That's 954-678-8354. An attorney will answer your call. And in addition to South Florida, they represent clients in Orlando, Tampa, and Fort Myers. You know, people don't like to talk about bankruptcy, but it's one of the few laws that exist to actually help consumers. The new stimulus package just made some important changes to the bankruptcy laws, so it's important to have an attorney explain the changes. Don't try to figure it out on your own, especially because they've got payment plans and little to no upfront fees. They can help you or anyone you know. If you're lucky enough to make it through COVID with no financial problems, chances are you know someone who is not that lucky. Gonzalez and Tybor can help. Even before the pandemic, a lot of people were carrying a lot of debt and living paycheck to paycheck. As we found out, bankruptcy can give them a chance to start fresh. It does not ruin your credit. Most people see an increase of 100 to 150 points on their credit score within a year of filing. So check out bankruptcyisgoodforyou.com. Again, the phone number, Gonzalez and Tybor, 954-678-8354. And now, today's episode.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back with you. Got some new episodes coming out this week. Make sure to check out all the ones from last week, including our sit-down. Alex and I had a long conversation with the original undrafted OG, Keith Askins, with the Miami Heat, and that was fun. We kept him for about an hour, told a bunch of stories about Pat Riley, about Glenn Rice, about LeBron James, Michael Jordan. So make sure you check all of that out, and also all of our Last Dance episodes. But today, we have gone overseas. Alex and I have. Forget Alf. We've gone overseas to Paris to our guy, Ricky J. Marc, who's over there in Paris. And he is what I call our resident NBA historian. He's the guy who Ricky, tell the people what you have, because eventually I'm finally going to get to actually setting this up. What do you have backlogged in terms of games?
Well, basically, the way I've got it set up is I've been collecting, taping, acquiring NBA games dating back to, I want to say, Game 7 of the Lakers-Celtics NBA Finals, when Bill Russell pretty much played his final game. So, I mean, I've just basically been hoarding this stuff. And I got to say, it's been very helpful during quarantine over here when we couldn't even leave our apartments and houses, because I would just run through games. And it has been, in many ways, therapeutic. And
again, I mean, you're talking about not just a few games.
Oh, no, not just a few. I mean, when I relocated over here, there were about 3 DVD books that I had to leave back in South Florida. I had to just stick with my digital collection, and that kind of hurt, because there's some games, like, for example, like the original tapings of like the 06 finals, for example. I had to leave that back home because I couldn't bring all those DVDs with me. So it's weird how NBA history is what it is. Like, I don't claim to be, the foremost source or whatever on this thing, but it's kind of weird how certain narratives tend to repeat themselves, especially with the way the media tends to cover it sometimes.
Well, we're going to cover some of that today, and everybody's into the nostalgia thing. The other night or yesterday, I'm sitting here and they've got Sonics Bulls on from, I guess, 96.
Oh, it's been great.
it's been terrific that they've had these games on here. And, I'm watching that and I'm watching Sean Kemp, who I remember very well before before the drugs, before he started eating too much, which the only guy I've ever seen who somehow got hooked on, cocaine and all that other stuff and blew up 100 pounds. So that's not the direction you're supposed to go. But his career went the other way. But I'm watching him in his prime in that series and realizing what a monster he was. Yep. And you do see some of the comparisons with Bam, to be honest, which is what was mentioned on draft night by Riley. And then I'm also watching the Bulls go on this 17-2 run or something like that in the third quarter and just realizing how freaking good they were. And all of that would have translated today, all of it.
It was surgical. It was surgical. I mean, the way the 96, 97, and even 98 Bulls played back then, they're not the kind of team you would want to play in 2K because you'd have Michael, Scotty, and then that's about it in terms of offensive options. They're not a video game friendly team, but when you watch the way they played back then, they cut teams apart with surgical efficiency. They would make a team like the 96 Magic, who had pretty much a prototypical type of team even for today. You had a dominant big man in the middle. You had Penny Hardaway, who was an all-world point guard, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott. These are guys who would be all-star caliber players today. They essentially got decimated by the Bulls. Mm-hmm. And, of course, some injuries like Horace Grant hurting his elbow in, I think, game 2, and some of the internal strife happening with Shaq's impending free agency in 96, that had a role to play. But realistically speaking, in terms of some of the greatest teams of all time, if you don't have the Bulls in your top 3, there's something wrong. Somebody's feeding you some bad information.
Yeah, and I think, again, we forget how good some of these teams they beat in the finals were because all of those teams had loaded starting lineups. Seattle's lineup really had no holes. Portland's lineup really had no holes. Utah's lineup really had no holes. And they beat all these teams anyway. All right, so we're going to bring Alex in for this. Today's episode, we're going to focus on this ESPN list. ESPN put out a list, the 74 greatest players of all time. Obviously, they're trying to generate conversation, so we bite. We're going to jump in here on this. And we're going to start here in the first half of the episode. There are 6 guys who played for the Heat who are on this list. So I will give you the numbers. And again, 2 of these guys, or 3 of them actually, the majority of their careers, well, almost 4, were spent elsewhere. But still, they all have a Heat tie. LeBron James is number 2 on the list. Shaquille O'Neal is number 10. Dwyane Wade is number 26. Gary Payton is number 53. Ray Allen is number 56. That one's interesting because they were traded for each other. And the last one is Alonzo Mourning at 63. So if you're looking for somebody who's not here, the one guy who's not here who you could make some kind of a case for would be Chris Bosh. That's the only other one that I think anybody would throw out there. Penny Hardaway played for the Heat. Obviously, career was cut short, where I think he would have been guaranteed to be on this list. So let's go through it. Alex, we'll start with you. Did any of those 6 placements jump out to you one way or the other?
Yes, and I'm going to do the right thing here and be the Heat fan representative that I am on this show and say that it's Dwyane Wade. He is too low on this list. I'm sorry. I don't even think it's a biased thing at this point. There's obvious bias here, but they put Kawhi ahead of him. What really? I get what Kawhi has done, right? I get the impact that this guy has had. He's a monster. But Dwyane Wade's entire career and Kawhi's entire career, we're really saying Kawhi has had the better career. Kawhi has had the better peak. And I'm not even to make this a Kawhi Wade thing, but that's just one example. He ends up 26 at all time. Giannis right behind him, which I think is preposterous. Mm-hmm. It's like Giannis is gonna be there for sure, but he hasn't really done anything yet. So I thought that was funny. It was good to see Alonzo back there. I'm glad they didn't snub him. We would have gotten really mad about that. But other than that, I don't really have a problem with it. I would have put Shaq higher than 10. I have him probably closer to 5. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I'm good with it.
All right, let's start here, Ricky, and let's start with Dwyane. We'll get to. I mean, LeBron obviously is the biggest argument here, and then Shaq. But let's start with Dwyane. So if we're going to say he should have been higher, we got to look at who's higher than him that he should have been ahead of. All right, so let's go through the list. Jordan, no. LeBron, no. Kareem, no. Bill Russell, no. Magic, no. Wilt, no. Larry, no. Duncan, no. Kobe, no. Although I could argue about peaks there. Shaq, no. Big O, no. Hakeem, no. Steph?
I think you could start with Steph. And I know that those of us that are not dyed-in-the-wool Heat fans are going to look to his unanimous MVP in 2016 and say that, oh, my goodness, how can you not put Steph ahead of Dwyane Wade? But here's the thing. When you look at what Dwyane Wade has won with and without, and when it really matters, you know, and I know this, to some, this might be considered a cheap argument, but has Steph Curry ever dominated an NBA Finals? I mean, that's one of the most important things you could perform on. You know, we talk a lot about, for example, Game 7 of 2006, the 2016 Finals, and how the excuse is, oh, Steph might not have been feeling good, or his knees were hurting, or he was injured, or the team was out of whack. No one scored for, I think, 7 minutes down the stretch of that game. Yeah. You're trying to tell me that if you replace Steph with a prime Dwyane Wade, he's not getting some shots up? We're not talking about Dwyane Wade with a rib injury in Game 7 of the 2005 Eastern Conference Finals here, where he doesn't know what he's doing, his rhythm's off. We're talking about prime Dwyane Wade. I don't think you can put Steph, let me see, Dwyane he's at what, 26? Steph is at, I don't think 26. You can put Dwyane 13 spots beneath Steph Curry. I think that's a prisoner of the moment thing, and that's something that we have grown to expect from a sensationalist type of rating system that ESPN loves doing. They love this stuff.
All right, so let's look at some of the other names, because if we're going to hold Steph out there, KD, I don't think you can make the argument for Dwyane over KD. Will we agree on that?
I mean, I would put KD higher, but I think you can make an argument. I think Dwyane and
should KD be ahead of Steph? Should KD be ahead of Steph, Alex?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I would say yes, just because he's been at such a high level since the beginning of his career, where Steph was kind of a late bloomer. Obviously, we know it was because of, you know, the injury stuff and starting off the Warriors when he got there. You know, we're just a terrible organization. We're in a terrible situation. And, you know, Kevin Durant was drafted with Harden and Westbrook. But at the same time, I'm going to give it to – I would give it to KD just because of his entire career and profile as an elite scorer, as basically the number 2 to LeBron for so long. But what I'm saying is KD, Steph, and Wade should all be more or less in the same ranking. Like, you know, maybe you could have them five spots apart, 3 spots apart, but 13, 15 spots apart, I think that's ridiculous.
KD or Steph, Ricky?
I would put KD ahead, because the thing is, if we're looking at the totality of the portfolio of the player's career, there was at one point in Steph's career, we didn't know if he was even going to make it to 10 years because of the ankle injury. Before the Achilles tear, KD had the foot injury, and he came back as though nothing happened. You didn't have those worries with KD. KD led you to the conference finals just about every year once they started to get good in the Western Conference of all places. And that was with coaching that you could argue was subpar. His greatness was evident throughout the season, throughout the playoffs, and throughout the finals. I mean, KD shows up on a team with Steph, Clay, Draymond, everybody, and he takes over. He was the best player in those finals. Yep. On that team. And Steph didn't step. I mean, it's not, and I'm not trying to hold this necessarily against Steph because he did whatever it was that he did. But I think those 2 final series showed us that, you know, once you put KD and Steph on the same team, you could tell who the better player was. It's almost like when you put Dwyane Wade and LeBron James on the same team, you could tell who was the greater player, even though their primes were comparable in 2009. So I don't know. I would put KD ahead.
All right, let's look at the next few, because, again, if we're going to get down to Dwyane, Dr. J, to me, is a hard one to figure because so much of his greatness was pre-NBA. Mm-hmm. How do we evaluate that? Because and there's also the cultural significance of Dr. J, which goes beyond. In some ways, it's a little like Iverson, where it kind of goes beyond actual performance, but Dr. J changed the way that the game was viewed. in many ways, and also did get the championship in '83 on a team where you could argue he was not the best player at that point. Somebody who's a little bit lower on the list was. Mm-hmm. And that was an excellent team. It wasn't just him. That was one of the better starting fives in NBA history. I'm torn on that one. Like, I feel like if you look at all the numbers, you might even say Dwyane had a higher peak than Dr. J, because Dr. J's peak was in the ABA, and I don't know what the level of competition was there compared to the NBA. Do you have an issue, Rick? You'll start there with Dr. J over Dwyane.
Okay, so the cultural significance, like as you mentioned, the cultural significance of Dr. J can't be understated. However, Dr. J, I mean, it's funny. Alfredo, because he mentioned he was a Sixers fan during the 80s because everybody was either Celtics or Lakers. From 1976, when the ABA and the NBA merged, to about 1985, the Sixers were in the NBA Finals almost every year. It was 81 and 84, in which those were the years in which the Celtics broke through, and from then on, they never looked back. The 76 or the 77 Finals, they go up 2-0 over the Blazers. Dr. J, as great as he was, I don't know what it was. Maybe there's a certain kind of killer instinct that, say, a Dwyane Wade. Mm-hmm. He didn't exhibit, and as a result, the series just gets away from them. He had multiple opportunities to get to the finals and win the championship, and kept losing to the Lakers or whoever. And it wasn't because he didn't have enough help, because as we all remember, back in those days, the best teams in the league were what you would call super teams today. And I know we kind of talked about this off air, but in the 70s, Dr. J had guys like a pre-injury Doug Collins. He had George McGinnis, who some might say was a LeBron type before LeBron came, in terms of a big, strong forward that could do just about everything. Daryl Dawkins, before they traded for Moses Malone. Guys like that. And then when you move into the 80s, he had guys next to him like Mo Cheeks, which was arguably the greatest name in NBA history, but that's another discussion. You had Andrew Toney, the Boston Strangler. You had Billy Cunningham, who eventually would go on to, I believe, become part owner of the Heat. You had Moses Malone, who would come in 83. Daryl Dawkins, who I believe was an all-star center at the time. Marc Iavaroni was another guy on that team. He had help. This isn't like LeBron James all by himself against the 2018 Warriors. He had help. They get to the finals, and they lose. Game 6, the legendary Magic Johnson game, where he had like 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists or something like that.
Right.
They didn't have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Game 6 was in Philly. How did they lose that game?
Right.
Because
Magic was the best player on the floor. Right. I mean, and Dr. J should have.
Julius had his opportunities to win a championship. The same way Wilt Chamberlain, back when you only needed to win 2 rounds to get to the finals. There were 8 teams in the league. He kept losing game 7s every year. He had ample opportunities. What did he do with those opportunities? And could it be held against him that his team lost? My argument is yes. Now, the cultural significance is, I'm not as romantic as those that like to put things on TV, like those legendary clips and all that stuff. He has 1 ring. 1 ring. Allen Iverson, yes. Cultural significance, big, of course. But he clashed with his coach. He refused to come off the bench late in his career. He, as pound for pound, one of the greatest scorers of all time, would shoot his teams out of games. He was a hard player to build around because the offense was centered around him. And, so I don't think you can put Julius Erving ahead of Dwyane Wade. Some of the old heads might, because, they have like this get off my lawn mentality. They might say, oh, no, you can't put Julius ahead of Wade. I would, because, 2006 NBA Finals. This was his 3rd season, and he was pretty much dominating veterans. I don't know. Your point, though, as we get to the next guy, your point about how many finals opportunities you have and what you do with them, then applies to the next guy, because this debate comes up all the time, because when you start talking about the best 2 guards in NBA history, depending on what position you put Jerry West at,
there's this debate on Dwyane or Jerry West. I know LeBron is a big Jerry West guy and always has been, but Jerry West at 16 again. And we're not making. I don't think ESPN is making the argument the plumbers argument, so to speak, that Jerry West was playing against plumbers. I think they're evaluating their careers in terms of what the actual contributions were for their times. Okay,
yeah,
there's no question in my mind that Jerry West couldn't guard Dwyane Wade. Okay, there's just at their peaks. There's just no way. But if we're just looking at what they did in their particular eras.
Right.
Is it fair? And again, none of us saw a lot of Jerry West. I don't know how much you saw. I've interviewed Jerry West a bunch of times, but in a very different capacity. I think he's the best executive in modern history. But Jerry West 10 spots ahead of Dwyane Wade. I think he's the only other guard ahead of Wade. Yes, he is. So the guards ahead of Wade. If you actually break this down, the guards ahead of Wade are Michael. We're not counting LeBron as a guard. So Michael, Magic, Robert, Oscar. So that's 3. Steph is 4.
Kobe.
Kobe's in there too. Okay. And Jerry West and then Dwyane. So they have Dwyane as a top 7 guard of all time, which is still pretty damn good. He's ahead of, Nash, ahead of Stockton, ahead of Iverson, and that whole core. I'll leave it to both of you guys. Jerry West over Dwyane Wade.
I mean, I guess you got to give it to him, right? When it comes to historical significance and everything that he did for the league, the guy's numbers were ridiculous, by the way, in the finals. We know. I mean, I'm sure Ricky could speak to this in more detail. I mean, I know Ricky could speak to this in more detail. Let me correct myself. But West was another guy who would fall into what Ricky was talking about, whereas like he kind of had his chances at some championships too, and he ended up getting one. But I think that's something that you could use against him when you're talking about him versus Dwyane, even if you're talking on a relative basis, right? Like what you were talking about before, that you're sure that Jerry West can't guard Dwyane. We're kind of ranking it based on what they did relative to their own eras, and even given that context, I just don't think it's possible to have him 9 spots or whatever ahead of Dwyane. I just think there's no way. I think besides the fact that I think Dwyane Wade is easily a more well-rounded player, did more in the highest stages, and it's just pretty much better in every way. I just don't understand the case for West just being that much higher than Wade. I think that one baffles me probably more than even the – I'm sorry, I'm blanking right here.
The Steph one you're thinking, right? Yeah. Because, but again, like I said, it's a lot of spots, and we're going to get to the spots in between, but there's no guards in between. So basically, they're saying that the decision that was made was to put Jerry ahead, but then also you're going to see next. It's Karl Malone, Moses Malone, Dirk, KG, Scotty, who's a wing, Elgin, who's kind of a wing, Barkley, who's a forward, Robinson, who's a center, and Kawhi, who's a forward. So there's no other guards in there. So they're not saying there's a bit of separation that way. They're just looking at it and saying Jerry's ahead of him, and then they're going to have all of these other guys. I mean, let's pivot a little bit to some of these bigs then, okay? Because I was interested by some of this, and then after the break, we'll get into more detail about the other guys. I figured we'd deep dive here on Dwyane. Karl and Moses. I'm actually pleasantly surprised that Moses is as high as he is, because I feel like he's one of the most underrated players in NBA history. Mm-hmm. And I also feel that way about Scotty in some ways, although I do think we need to have the Scotty discussion. Do we have let's look at these bigs, okay? And we don't have to rank them against each other because we'll do that in a second. But Karl Malone, Moses Malone, Dirk Nowitzki, KG, can you make an argument that Dwyane had a bigger impact than any of those 4?
I'd put Dwyane ahead of oh wow. Yeah, these are You see, I'd be comfortable putting Dwyane ahead of just about everybody except for Karl Malone. And it's ironic that I do that because, if we go back to the NBA Finals discussion, Karl Malone you can trust him up until about the first week of June. Karl Malone will give you everything. He will give you an MVP season. He will give you longevity. And then when it's a tie game with about 7 seconds left in game 1 of the NBA Finals, in which you've been crowned NBA MVP. He'll miss 2 consecutive free throws, which will lead to a Michael Jordan game winner. One thing I'll say about Karl Malone is that if you look at the NBA, the 97 and the 98 NBA finals, and I watched all 12 of those games, I've had time. If Karl Malone had played the way he did in Game 5 of the 98 finals, when they sent the series back to Utah for Game 6, and pretty much gave Rodman, Kukoc, everybody fits, they would have won one of those 2 series. I won't say both, but they would have won one of those 2. There's something about Malone where when it gets really close and tight, he is not someone you can count on. That's where, in my opinion, Charles Barkley has an advantage. That's where someone like Tim Duncan has an advantage. Now, to kind of briefly go back to touch on very quickly on the guards, as far as my guards are concerned, in terms of shooting guards, I have MJ, Kobe, Dwyane, and then Jerry in that order.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerry is one of the toughest defenders in NBA history. Hard-nosed. His numbers are ridiculous. You're talking about a consistent, he's good for 24, 25, anywhere between 26 and 30 points a game in his prime. However, and I know this is a terrible sample size, but, the 74 season when he was 35 years old, he averaged about 0.7 blocks a game. I'm willing to bet he wasn't blocking too many shots in his prime, and no guard has blocked more shots than Dwyane Wade. My goodness, that puts him, at least for me, offense, defense. Yes, a lot of those stats weren't recorded back then, but you're talking about the greatest shot blocking guard in NBA history. As far as I'm concerned, the only 2 shooting guards greater than Dwyane Wade are Michael Jordan and the late Kobe Bryant, in that order. Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. So, and I'm with you on that. To me, Dwyane has to be ahead of Jerry. And then again, you look at these bigs. And so when I look at these 4, I don't put Dwyane ahead of KG.
And Jerry could play today, by the way. He's one of those guys that if you dropped him in 2020, he get you 20 points a game easy.
How do you look at KG and Dirk? Because the debate's always going to be Dirk and Dwyane because they faced off against each other twice. I would have liked to have seen them go against each other again when Dwyane was the focal point of the team, although you can make an argument that Dwyane was the best player in the 2011 finals, which was right smack in the middle of Dirk's prime. I feel that in some ways Dwyane gets knocked against Dirk because Dirk didn't have a super team later in his career and won anyway, where he was clearly the focal point of that team with obviously, Jason Terry and an old Jason Kidd and an old Sean Marion. Can you, let's go, it's a little more modern, so I'll go to Alex on this one. Can you make the case for Dwyane over Dirk?
Yes, I think it's a very easy case to make as well, too. And again, I know how I'm sounding. I know that I'm supposed to sound like this and I'm supposed to have these biases, but I get it, right? Dirk, for his entire career, was one of the greatest offensive talents in the game, one of the greatest offensive talents we've ever seen. They were winning 50 games for the overwhelming majority of his career. He got deep in the playoffs over and over. They won that championship where he just played phenomenally after pretty much getting owned by Udonis Haslem the first time they matched up with the Heat. But I don't understand. What is the case to put him over Dwyane? Like, Dwyane is the more well-rounded player, did more at the top of his game, did more at the highest level, won more titles, which is usually like the tiebreaker. They put Scottie ahead of Dwyane. I'm guessing that was because of the titles. So it's like there's a lot of like contradicting, logic here. And I understand why it's tough to kind of like sort this out or rank this because, there's so many different careers, so many different eras, so much different context. But in reality, the Dwyane and Dirk thing, it's like they played in the same era. Dwyane beat Dirk. He won more than Dirk and was better at the top of his game than Dirk. So I just don't really understand. I don't mind them being close to each other in the rankings, but I don't understand having Dirk over Dwyane at this point.
I think it's, this is ironic in which you're talking about someone who won an NBA MVP in 2007, the year after Dwyane beat him in the finals after Dirk himself choked at the free throw line. It's a weird thing with these big men where when they choke, it seems to be at the line. But anyways, I digress. 2007, Dirk won the MVP, but he won it and he accepted the award from home. Why did he accept the award from home?
Because they lost to the Golden State Warriors in the first round.
Exactly. And it's funny because Dirk Nowitzki, one of the most unguardable players in NBA history. Even back when he was dropping 40 on the Heat in the 05 season, he's 7 feet tall. He can jump a little bit and his release is high. You're not blocking that shot. I mean, Ethan, you could probably speak to this better than me, but correct me if I'm wrong. Did they not have Earl Barron pretending to be Dirk?
Yes. They called him Dark Nowitzki. Yes.
Yeah. So here's the funny thing. They completely took Dirk out of that series. It was basically like a bigger CBA type of team in the Warriors where I don't think they even had a 7-footer aside from that one, I think, Latvian guy.
Biedrins. They didn't play him though. They basically went with Barron. That team was better than an 8 seed, by the way. But that team was Barron, Jason Richardson were the core guys, right? There was
Barron, Jason
Steven
Richardson,
Jackson.
Steven Jackson, Monte Ellis. Mm-hmm. Matt Barnes. Yeah, those guys. They completely took him out of that series. Now, I'm trying to think of a series where, not counting a series in which he was injured, where a team was able to successfully neutralize Dwyane Wade in the playoffs.
But, Ricky, isn't that the point? I mean, Alex is asking the question, why are they putting Dirk ahead of Dwyane? I think the reason is the durability. I think that because Dirk was more of a compiler simply because he stayed healthy. I mean, you can make the peak argument, but again, the peak argument is difficult to make when the other guy also did win an MVP and also did beat. I mean, again, it was one of the great mental collapses of all time by somebody on the other side, but did beat the big three Heat. In what was still LeBron's prime in 2011. And so,
but do they beat the Heat without LeBron playing as bad as he did?
No, of course not. Of course, they probably don't even beat the Heat if Mario Chalmers is starting the whole series instead of Mike Bibby. Okay. But the reality is that it happened. And so you got to give Dirk credit for it. He played well enough to win. It's not like, his finals was better than some of the Steph finals that we talk about. It wasn't a bad finals. It's just Dwyane outplayed him in that finals, I thought. But it wasn't a bad finals. And I think what's happening is push comes to shove, they're giving the durability to Dirk because a lot of the other stuff is similar enough. Now, I look at the rest of this list. I mean, to me, KG, I think people forget KG's greatness in Minnesota because they're just thinking of Boston KG, who was, to me, a little bit of a different player. But then
they never got out of the first round.
No, they didn't get out of the first round. He also didn't have – he had Sprewell and Marbury around him, which knuckleheads, although talented. He had Terrell Brandon. He had some players, but they also, they should have won that one year. But let's look at some of the other guys ahead of Dwyane here, and then again we're going to go to break. All right, Scotty, Elgin, Charles, David. We've already talked Kawhi. Okay, now Scotty's 21. I want to talk about him after this. Let's talk about the other three. Elgin. It's tough for me with the Laker guys, man, because there were so many great ones. I don't even know how you separate in some ways. Charles, who I agree with, I would put Charles ahead of Karl Malone. I think Charles has become underrated as a player in retrospect, the more that he talks as a TNT analyst. Mm-hmm. And I think people are starting to realize it when they're watching these old games. Like, there wasn't really anything he couldn't do. And I also think David Robinson to me has become completely we don't talk about him anymore. Like,
not enough.
And part of that, I guess, is Duncan kind of usurped it there. But part of it is because Hakeem embarrassed him in his MVP season.
Yeah.
But
I got to the finals.
He did get to the finals. He needed Tim to get there, right? That was 99.
No, I was just making another passing joke about Dirk.
Dirk not making the finals. Right. Well, he didn't make the finals that year though. He lost to Hakeem. Hakeem wiped the floor with him in the Western Conference Finals.
Oh yeah, never mind.
And then of course Kawhi. Can you make the case? And then we'll go to break. Can you make the case for Dwyane over David I can't make the case for him over Charles. I know Charles doesn't have the championship, but I can. Elgin or David?
Oof. Okay. Well, for starters, I think on principle, I have to put Elgin ahead of David Robinson. You're talking about a guy who averaged 38 points and 18 rebounds a game one year. I mean, that's crazy. I think that was the same season Wilt averaged 50.
Yep.
And that's – so for me, in terms of greatest small forwards, he's my third. He's behind only LeBron and Larry in that order.
But doesn't he also get obscured, Ricky? Because, again, I think a lot of these guys get it gets colored by what they do after the league. And Elgin was such a bad general manager that I feel like that, it's like Jerry West's stock and profile went up because he was so good at the post-career stuff, and Elgin's went down because he was so bad at it.
Well, yeah, and see, unfortunately, people like to use post-retirement legacy against the player, and I think that's unfair because if we're just looking at who they were as players, Elgin Baylor was the guy that every high-flying player ever since owes their style to. Guys like Julius, guys like David Thompson, MJ, even Robert Pack dunking on, I think, Hakeem in like 93 or something like that. These guys all owe a lot to Elgin Baylor. This was the guy who took the game of basketball from north-south to up-down. He was the first guy that could fly in the NBA. And people don't talk about him enough, of course, because he was associated with the Clippers. But we're talking about one of the great – okay, this is a guy who retired with a 27.4 point, 13.5 rebound a game average. Are there any active players right now with those numbers? Right now.
No.
If they were to retire right now, would they have those numbers? I don't think so.
Right.
This guy, I think you put him ahead. Now, the thing is, what David has and what Elgin doesn't have technically is a ring. Mm-hmm. But that ring those rings came after the back injury, after Robinson after he declined and everything like that, and after Tim Duncan came to town. Now, Elgin, I think it's fair to put Elgin ahead of David. Now, people might look at this and say, what, you don't think David Robinson's that good? I mean, my goodness, look at the first 30 names on this list. You're talking about legends. You could build a championship team around virtually each and every one of these guys. Well, except for maybe Jerry West, because he had like 20 opportunities. But you could do that. And that's the thing that's crazy about this discussion is that we're talking about essentially like basketball gods, But I would put Elgin ahead of David. Now, this is, I don't know, maybe this is subject to change. Maybe new information will come out, new research will come out, more games will come out. But for now, I've got him ahead.
All right, so we're gonna continue this after the break because I still want to get to the Scottie Dwyane discussion. And I still want to get to the Kawhi Dwyane discussion, and I want to get to an Isaiah Thomas discussion here too, because I feel we talk about somebody whose greatness is being obscured by what they did after basketball. I think he definitely qualifies. And then we're going to get into sort of our biggest snubs here. But first, I want to tell you about one of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that's Christopher's Bakery. You can find them on social media at Nilla Wafer Cakes. We had Courtney Harris here on the podcast last week. He was terrific. Big Heat and NBA fan. He could actually do pretty well on this pod. Also, check out at Nilla Wafer Cakes on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Christopher's Bakery is named after Courtney's brother, who passed away from a seizure at just 11 years old. They partnered with Miami Nicholas Children's Hospital and set up a fund where they donate a portion of the sales to epilepsy neuroscience research, since that's where they spent much of his life. The signature product, and I've had it, I'm going to order another one, is a vanilla wafer cake, which was created by Courtney's father over 30 years ago. They've got other cake options available for shipping as well, and they ship all across the country. And even with COVID over, we'll start hand delivering here again in South Florida, but you can still get it sent to you here in South Florida. So go to the page. It's a special page. It's called Christopher'sBakery.com/5 Reasons. Make sure you spell it out, FIVE Reasons, and enter the code 5 Reasons, also spelled out FIVE Reasons, for 15% off everything that you order. So check it out. Christopher's Bakery. Help Courtney out. It's terrific stuff, and you'll help us out. All right, so let's get to it, guys. Let's take a look at the rest of this, because Scottie and Dwyane, Scotty's 21. Dwyane's 26. Scotty was only the best player on his team once.
Mm-hmm.
And it went pretty damn well for a while. They were 55 and 27 with Pete Myers at the 2. And totally different team, and probably could have gotten to the finals again that year. Scotty was top 3 for MVP. But, of course, declined to go in the game, as we've seen in Last Dance. Everybody now remembers that again. Declined to go in the game at the end. Shot was designed for Kukoc. Kukoc makes the shot. Pippen very unhappy. It became part of his legacy. Greatest number 2 in NBA history. Does anybody disagree with that? Or is Kobe?
Yeah, it's one of them two, probably. Maybe, I mean, unless you want to count Dwyane as a number 2, maybe you could count Magic Johnson as a number 2 or Kareem as a number 2. But as far
I would have Worthy as a number 2 in that discussion. But because by the time Magic was,
Kareem was older.
I would have it as so.
Yeah, that's fair.
So if he's the greatest number 2 though, Dwyane won in the championship as a number 1. I don't care what you say about Shaq at that point. Dwyane was the number 1. The numbers bear it out and all the rest of that. And he was sort of 1B for the first year with LeBron, and then was clearly number 2 after that. Scotty, we talk about Dwyane being a great defender. Scotty was elite. Dwyane was a much better scorer than Scotty, even when Scotty had the team to himself. As facilitators, they were both pretty damn good. I might give the edge to Scotty because of his size, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Maybe. Again, the issue with Dwyane was the consistency of the defense. It wasn't the peak of the defense.
No, I'm not even talking about the defense. I think Scotty, obviously, you give him the edge there. I was talking about the playmaking part.
Scotty was a pretty damn good playmaker. It was in the system, unlike Dwyane. It was in the system. Ricky, where would you stand on that?
Okay, so Scottie Pippen, the thing with Scotty is he is in many ways like a proto LeBron. You know, first you had Scotty, and then basketball evolved, and then you had Grant Hill in his prime, and then LeBron came a few years later, who had the total package. Scotty was never the explosive scorer. His career high was, I believe, 47 points. It took him he was drafted in 87. It took him 10 years to get that in a game against the Nuggets in 97 or something like that. He was never the guy that would go for 35, 40. 29, 11, that's his best type of game. I wouldn't put Scotty ahead of Dwyane Wade. I really wouldn't. Even though he is my favorite player of all time, Scotty is arguably the greatest role player of all time. He is the perfect guy to have as a number 2, mainly because you can run a team for about a decade and you won't hear about drama in the locker room in terms of player chemistry. Now, his relationship or his decision to sign that bad contract in the early 90s, that's a whole nother situation. Mm-hmm. But you're talking about the guy who knew his role. You're not going to have a problem there. But in terms of greatest players of all time, I don't think you could put Scotty ahead of Dwyane Wade. Now, some people will try to do that because of the rings and everything like that. And I understand where they're coming from. But the reality is we saw what Scotty was going to – we saw a team with Scotty at the head of it. Now, granted, should we judge him because of that 1.8 seconds? No, I don't think that's fair. It's a bad moment in an otherwise amazing regular season. However, there were a couple more games after that. Scotty had the opportunity, even after the Hugh Hollins call in, I think, Game 5, where he allegedly fouled him and they called it and they almost won or whatever. He had the opportunity to pretend to be Jordan and guide them past the Knicks in Game 7. They had the lead, I think, going into the fourth quarter, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure we can probably go back and confirm that or whatever.
They did. I trust me. I was on the other side of that thing. So I was a Knicks fan at the time. So I remember.
As was I. In 94? Yeah, I was 3 or something. But still, that was my first team. I was right there with you. They didn't win. Now, granted, the Knicks were a better team, but the major flaw of the Knicks, as we would go on to see, is that they tend, in many ways, it was kind of like the 92 Blazers. Very talented, rugged, collapsed at the worst time. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't put Scotty ahead of Dwyane Wade.
All right. To me, the other way to look at this is if they both played together in their prime, Dwyane would be the lead dog, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, he would be a lesser lead dog than Jordan, but he would still be the lead dog, right?
Oh, they would win championships.
Also,
Right.
by the way, you mentioned that Pippen is never going to give you problems. We know, and you qualified it with the drama that came with Pippen came because of other circumstances, not because of him questioning his role. But once you said that, it made me think he never really had to accept a secondary role in his. I mean, not a secondary role. He never had to accept a role that wasn't obvious when he was in his athletic prime in the NBA. Whereas he never had to deal with, like, let's say if he had to play with somebody more or less on par with him. I don't know, name a guy who isn't Michael Jordan.
Well, Clyde Drexler. I mean, somebody like that, right?
Okay.
Like somebody closer to him in that regard.
Maybe we would have seen something different happen. But I completely agree with you here. I just don't see how – I don't see how you could put Scottie over Wade when it's Scottie only had that 1 year as the lead guy, did very well. But Wade had a whole career of it before LeBron came here. And he won a title at the age of 23, playing like Michael Jordan.
Yep.
Scottie Pippen, just his accomplishments, as great as they are, I just don't see how at the highest level he even compares to Dwyane.
Oh yeah, and one more thing. We talk a lot about that '94 season and how they won. I think it was 55 games. Mm-hmm. They were treading water in '95 before Michael came back. They were a 500 team. Now, the thing is, of course, there were also some external factors here. Horace Grant left in free agency, and Scottie was fed up with the team. But still, yeah, they were a 500 team before Michael came back and saved the day. You could start to see the weight of carrying everything weigh on Scottie. Scottie is, as I said before, the greatest role player of all time. And that is where he is able to flourish. Now, for example, I think we briefly talked about how the 2011 Mavericks had a bunch of guys that were a little bit past their prime and stuff like that. The beautiful thing about that team was that Jason Kidd, Sean Marion, a lot of those guys, they were past their prime, but because they didn't have to be the alpha on that team, they were able to basically harness their amazing abilities that they had when they were in their primes, and feed it into a disastrous collective for that team. So when you have a team like the Bulls, who they still had all of their guys. They still had Horace. They still had BJ. Horace and BJ were actually they were all-stars in '94. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The triangle offense was an offense that is more team-oriented. Michael bucked that offense a lot of times in the fourth quarter, mm-hmm. and it took him a full year to buy into it in 1990. That was the year, and I think they mentioned it in the documentary, where mm-hmm. that was arguably Phil Jackson's greatest coaching accomplishment, because then people were able to say, well, you're not that great without Michael. Let's see how you do. And we were able to see it. Now, one last thing on Scottie, and I know we have to move on. One of the reasons why I suspect Phil gave the ball to Tony Kukoc in that game 3 was because what people don't realize is that the possession before the Knicks tied it up, Scottie had the ball and didn't know what to do with it. He got lost. Tony Kukoc was known for hitting big shots throughout the season. I think against Milwaukee, against Indiana throughout the regular season, he was an easier person to give the ball to just chuck it up there. Scottie Pippen, if you notice, wasn't the kind of person that would slash into the lane and hit a pull-up jumper. He wasn't the type of fluid scorer that Michael was. And it was a good judgment call, at least as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know. I mean, you as a result of that, you can't put him ahead of Dwyane Wade. It just
so it sounds like we would have, and I want to move to other players now. It sounds like we would have Dwyane somewhere in the 18 to 20 area, based on what we're talking about with some of the guys we think mm-hmm. he should be ahead of, maybe an 18 to 20. I do think there are some guys behind Dwyane that cases can be made for. But I want to go through here. Let's do this rapid fire. I want to go through some specific players and scenarios with you, and you just give me your shortest, best answers on whether or not, in your view, these are the right decisions. Shaquille O'Neal at 10. I think one of you said you'd have him closer to 5. I think it was Alex.
Yeah.
So then the debate becomes, first thing, Shaq or Kobe. Kobe ahead of Shaq. You would have Kobe's 9, Shaq's 10. Alex, who would you have ahead of who?
I'd have Shaq ahead of Kobe by a couple spots, maybe, I don't know, 5 spots. Like, I wouldn't be against having Kobe as like 11 or 12. I wouldn't be against having Shaq at like even 5, 6, to be honest. I think, you know, you can really make cases for guys like, you know, are you going to pick Magic over Shaq or Larry over Shaq? Maybe, maybe not, but I'll take Shaq over Kobe.
Ricky, who would you have?
Yeah, I'd have Shaq over Kobe. I mean, this is a guy who in his prime averaged 38 points and 17 rebounds in the 2000 NBA Finals against the Pacers. Yeah, Kobe has never had a finals like that.
Yeah, I think I would too. But then the other argument becomes having Shaq here 2 spots ahead of Hakeem when in their respective maybe Shaq wasn't in his prime at that point, but Hakeem he wasn't ready. But Hakeem did take it to Shaq when they played against each other. So that one becomes a little bit more challenging. All right, here's another one. Isaiah Thomas at 31, behind Stockton at 28, Iverson at 29, Nash at 30.
That's offensive.
Yep. I can't have Isaiah behind Allen Iverson. I'm sorry.
No way.
That'll get you into a fight in certain barbershops.
What is even the justification for that? Just better scorer? Because there's no other area of the game that Allen was better than Isaiah in.
I think Isaiah continues to suffer in many ways. In many ways, like his Chicago brethren, Tim Hardaway, because of things that were done or said in the past, and they're being held against his portfolio today, keeping him out of the respect that he deserves for his efforts. Isaiah Thomas is the greatest small guard in NBA history. Okay. Now there's Magic, Oscar, Stockton, Isaiah, guys like that. But you're talking about a guy who was the best player on 2 championship teams. I don't know how you put him ahead of Allen Iverson, especially considering Isaiah could have easily been a 27-point-a-game scorer in his prime, but knew that in order to win, he had to scale back around 5 points in order to give opportunities to guys like the microwave, Vinnie Johnson.
Or Dumars or Aguirre or Dantley or any of the other guys he had, yeah.
Isaiah should be a lot higher than he is, and he should have been on that dream team.
No question about that. All right, so let's get to a couple of other ones here. Patrick Ewing at 37 and Kevin McHale at 36 is another one I don't like.
I hate that.
I mean, Patrick always had to carry that damn team. And he kept running into Jordan. This idea that he came up small in big moments, I think is unfair. He came up big in plenty of big moments against the Heat. In those series, I don't really understand that one. I guess rings is the argument there, but like we've said, they don't use the rings argument in other cases. So I don't get that one. But here's another one. I don't necessarily like. I think Chris Paul is underrated at 40.
Yes,
I think he should be higher than that, right? I'm looking at the point guards ahead of him. Stockton 28, Nash 30. We mentioned Isaiah, who we think should be higher, 31. Jason Kidd 35. Chris Paul and Iverson, I guess, if we call him a point guard. But Chris Paul, to me, again, is this another rings argument? Because he should be higher, no?
Yeah, we're talking about the guy who we call the point guard. Mm-hmm. This was a guy who was neck and neck with Kobe in 2008 for the MVP award. This is a guy that had Tyson Chandler, David West, Peja Stojakovic, and I think Mo Peterson in that lineup. And they won like 54, 55 games or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Paul should be higher. He shouldn't be higher than Isaiah, but he should be higher. Also, Bob Cousy is way too high on this list.
Yeah, I'm with you at 41. Yeah, I'm with you
way too high. You can't put him ahead of no, he's too high. Oh, you can't put him ahead of Gary Payton.
Well, okay, so that was going to be my next ask. Okay, so Cousy's at 41, Westbrook's at 42. The next point guard after that is GP.
I love that those two are back-to-back, by the way.
Oh, and Westbrook and Cousy? Yeah, it couldn't be more different. But I mean, even if it's an error thing, I don't think you can make the – well, I think GP should be ahead of Russ, but I'm going to be in the minority on that. I think GP is being – another one who's being significantly underrated historically.
Why isn't he ahead of? I mean, why isn't he ahead of Russ?
Because he didn't have he wasn't a triple-double machine, I guess. He didn't win an MVP. I mean, right? I mean, he did win a championship. I don't know that we can count that one.
Defensive Player of the Year.
He was Defensive Player of the Year. He could have been a much bigger scorer on that team. It wasn't this way the team was built. I don't know.
He was the best player on the finals team versus Jordan, wasn't he? Like,
yes.
Well, yeah.
Well, Kemp had moments.
Yeah, they needed Kemp to be great, and he wasn't because – honestly, and there's actually a YouTube video out there that details all of this. There's a case that could be made for Dennis Rodman as being the 96 Finals MVP.
Oh, he was unbelievable. I'm watching. He's just unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't. Gary Payton's too low on this list. I mean, this is a guy who, if you talk to Jason Kidd, who was 35 on this list, Jason Kidd used to have nightmares about this guy because they grew up in Oakland.
Yeah, GP outplayed him most of the time. No, I'm with you. All right, so let's get to a couple of others here. Ray at 56. Again, I'm not thinking of Heat Ray, although you have to throw in the shot, obviously. But he's right behind Paul Pierce, 54. Vince is 55. Vince has had a complicated career.
I don't get that. So you see me? So he's behind Paul Pierce, as in Paul Pierce is ranked higher on the list, right?
Paul Pierce is 54 and Ray is 56.
Yeah, I think, it's weird. I've noticed, this is how I know, and I hate to be railing on ESPN, but you can tell by this list that people who have a YouTube account had something to do with making this list. Someone must have seen Vince Carter's, all the dunks and all that other stuff and think, oh, yeah, we should put him way ahead of some of these other guys on this list. Now, here's the thing. Well, I think we can all agree that Vince Carter has been, in his prime was a great shooting guard. At one point, it was Kobe, Vince, T-Mac in terms of who was the best. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, can you count on him? There was a time when he was called half man, half amazing. And then within 2 years, he was half man, half a season.
Right.
Oh, wow. And then they traded him to New Jersey.
He also did not come up big in big games historically. I think his reputation has been changed in a positive way because of the way he first thing, he's just a great guy, so everybody likes him.
Yeah.
But also it's because he changed his game probably more significantly than any player in NBA history to be able to stick around as long as he did. But I don't know that you can make the case that Vince Carter at 55 was better than Alex English at 67.
Didn't he score like the most total points in the 80s, Alex English?
English, he didn't do anything else. But who's not on this list? And to me, I did this thing about a year ago, and if you went at that point to Basketball Reference and literally lined up Carmelo Anthony's numbers with Alex English, they are exactly the same player. The only difference is one of them played in New York. They're the same exact play. I mean, it was scary. Like to every metric, like 20 metrics, they were the same. And I would argue that Bernard King in his prime was better than both of them. And he's at 69, but that's injury. Some of this is difficult because of the injuries.
Why
Penny
is
Hardaway
was up so high?
Because he's probably on ESPN.
Why is Paul Pierce on this list? Period. I don't.
Paul Pierce was pretty good, but are you noticing a Boston bias on this list? Look at some of this stuff here. I mean, you mentioned where ESPN's in Connecticut. Bill Russell at 4, Bird at 7. I mean, I can make it. I think Bird is okay. Those two may be fair, but then we mentioned Kuzi, okay, who I think Havlicek at 33. I think is high. McHale at 36, I've already said it should not be ahead of Patrick. You have Kuzi at 40, Bill Walton at 48. I don't know where you go with that one. I mean, maybe the Boston influence helps. He didn't play enough in the pros.
No, he didn't. I mean, he was one of the most. I mean, if you're talking about overall basketball career, including when he was like undefeated for 4 years at UCLA.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Fine. So this is NBA, right? And he only played. He had 5 effective seasons.
He had one of the shortest primes in NBA history for an elite guy who's in the Hall of Fame. I mean, if you're going to make that argument, Penny Hardaway had 5 seasons that were as good as Bill Walton's seasons. Grant Hill had 5 seasons. He's not on this list. Tracy McGrady does make the list at 52. I mean, that's another interesting debate because when Grant and Tracy were together, Grant was the best player on the team. But again, I understand Tracy's injuries didn't cut him short quite as much, but Grant stuck around for another 10 years like Vince did. So that's a tough one for me.
I'm going to talk about two guys who couldn't really do it by themselves. T-Mac never got out of the first round before he was on the Spurs.
No, and Grant couldn't either. Grant couldn't either. And now part of it was the injury. All right, so let's go to a couple more. I do want to address a couple more guys on here. Zoe at 63 behind Dennis, 2 spots behind Robert Parrish. Again, I'm looking at Celtic bias there. Dennis I can make the case for.
Dennis Rodman?
Yeah, I wouldn't – look, Robert Parrish to me was a very talented, very good center. Would I put him ahead of Mourning? Honestly, I think, and this is with McHale too, I think the fact that he played on loaded teams in the 80s and kind of inflated his legend, and the fact that he retired as one of the oldest players in NBA history kind of inflated it as well. I wouldn't have put him ahead of someone like Mourning who had to carry more weight throughout his career. You're talking
put Zoe on those teams with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale instead of Robert Parrish. I mean, you just substitute the two of them. Parrish didn't dominate games. Zoe dominated
better
games.
Than Alonzo?
Nothing.
I think he was probably better offensively.
I was going to say that has to be like the one thing, right?
Zoe was primarily a defensive player, and his offense. He
wasn't. Zoe was clunky, but I don't think the difference was as great as the difference on the other end. And he wasn't an intimidator like Zoe was. He wasn't. He was
the Chief.
He was intimidating, but not like Zoe, dude. I'm sorry. I'm taking Zoe there. I'm taking Zoe.
Me too. I'm just.
I like. Okay, and then here's another one. Dave Cowens is here at 66. How many freaking Celtics are on this list? And then, and we're not even going to count Ray, but let's get to this one because I found it interesting. The other guy who pops up on the list here, let's go to the current guys and then we'll close. Mm-hmm. James Harden at 32. We mentioned Giannis at 27.
Too soon.
How is Giannis 6 spots ahead of Harden already? Like, I don't understand it.
It's too soon for him.
Harden has been, like, incredible for, like, 5-6 years straight. Giannis just started being what he is. Like,
2 years ago.
Kawhi at 25, Westbrook at 42, and then we go through to the next list. There's not a lot of current. Anthony Davis at 45. I feel like that's going to go up when the championship happens. But then I was really fascinated by this. If you go to this last column, 56 to 74, the only current player is Dame Lillard.
That was weird.
And I wouldn't have guessed that. I mean, if you're looking at and again, I'm a huge Dame fan, but is there somebody we're not thinking of? Is there somebody in the current game that should be there?
I just did a very quick, trying to think on it, like who would have a better case from current players as you were saying that. I'm going to pose a question here. Does Jimmy Butler have a better case than Dame Lillard?
Nah.
They've never won anything with. They never won anything with Jimmy as the best player. That's the only problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask the hype beasts or whatever, Dame has 2 iconic playoff moments.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, ask anybody.
Well, one of them, Ricky, is over the guy that I think you could actually put ahead of him, who's Paul George.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could make a case for Paul because look, you're gonna make a case for Jimmy. You got to put Paul George ahead of Jimmy. I'm sorry.
No, you're right.
But the other guy who's not here, and I'm not a fan, okay, as people know, but Kyrie Irving has done more as a pro than Dame Lillard has, hasn't he?
That went through my head, but it's like he never had. He
never had a moment. I mean, he had a moment.
No, he had without question. Without question, he has. But the problem with Kyrie Irving is, for the first 4 years of his career, he didn't touch the playoffs once. Right. And, he didn't start succeeding until LeBron came back, and then they traded him to a Boston team that already had talent on it. And he managed to blow that up within a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Kyrie, without question, Kyrie to me, I would put him in kind of like a Chauncey Billups type of category where maybe where you can define a huge moment from him based on something that happened in the NBA Finals. Because Chauncey was treading water until he ended up in the Pistons in 2002.
Yeah, he bounced to 6 different teams. Right.
Yeah.
Would you have Chauncey ahead of Tony Parker? Tony Parker's 70.
You see, Tony's benefited from, being in San Antonio, and he's had many duds in the playoffs.
Yes, he has. But they have Manu 12 spots ahead of Tony.
Well, Manu in 2005 against that Pistons team. I remember I think it was Real GM, those message boards from back in the day. Some guy had the nerve to post something about, is Manu greater than Michael? Now, of course, that's obviously ridiculous.
Right.
But I think you can find a better player than Tony Parker on this list.
Yep.
You can replace him. Honestly, if you told me, even if you told me Chauncey Billups was ahead of Tony, I'd have been fine with it, because you take Chauncey, you look at the excellence that they did, like that they had 2 straight NBA finals, 1 championship, Eastern Conference Finals from 2003 to 2008, the longest streak until LeBron decided he was going to rule everything. He moves to Denver. He takes Carmelo to the conference finals. Mm-hmm. They move to New York, and all of a sudden New York becomes a threat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if it wasn't for him popping his Achilles in, I think, 2012, right, who knows what would have happened with that Clippers team.
Well, you mentioned Carmelo. Is he the guy that's looking at this list? Who's the guy who's looking at this list, which has Artis Gilmore, Dikembe at 73 and Artis Gilmore at 74, and then it closes? Who's the guy who's looking at this list that is looking at this and saying, I should be on here?
Deion Waiters.
I can give you, I think I can give you maybe 2 or 3 names.
Okay.
Is Reggie Miller on this list?
Yep. He is. He is.
Okay. I would say Chris Webber, Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony. Because Chris Webber, he had his injury issues and his clutch issues. He was kind of like a mini Malone in that regard. But everywhere he went, they ended up in the playoffs within a year. That 2002 team, I know people like to say that the 2002 Kings should have been in the finals. But even if you take away that suspect Game 6, Peja Stojakovic was wide open with about 11 seconds left in regulation in Game 7 with the score tied, and he airballed a wide open jumper. It was like Dan Marley in the 93 finals. They had every chance possible to win that series against LA, and they choked it. Mm-hmm. I think him choking in big moments holds him back significantly, but Tim Duncan, Karl Malone, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, they knew Chris Webber by name between the years of 96 and 2005. Dwight Howard?
Chris Webber, like a top Dwight 7 player in his prime?
Easily. Dwight Howard is a guy, and I know there's a lot of drama both behind the scenes and on the court. He's had a refreshing season this year, but you're talking about a guy who won, I think, either 3 or 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. I don't know how a guy with that many DPOYs is left off this list.
And won him 3 in a row.
Yeah. I mean, who would you rather
how is Dave Cowens ahead of him? That's what I would say. Who would you
rather have between Dikembe Mutombo or Dwight Howard in his prime? We all saw what he did in 2009. The guy was a freak of nature.
I'm with you. I think a lot of this is personal bias at this point, and I do think that there was a Boston bias for whatever reason. It comes. I mean, I don't think there's a Laker bias. I think the Laker picks were legitimate. I think there was a Boston bias, and I'm looking at some of them, and I'm just like, okay, how do you not have Dwight on there? I think there's great what ifs with Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. Those are the 2 to me real what ifs. They definitely would have been on this list if they'd been healthier. But then to have Vince on the list, but not then. Derrick Rose might have been on this list too. Brandon Roy might have been on this list if he had another 3 or 4 years the way he was going. But I don't, the Dame Lillard one to me is interesting because I love Dame, so I'm never gonna take shots at Dame, but for that to be the guy and it not to be Dwight, I think is I think that's recency bias. Honestly, I don't know.
I think Ricky laid it out perfectly. Like you substitute, maybe we go Dame, Pierce, and somebody else, and you take them out for Webber, Dwight, and who was the third?
Webber, Dwight, and Carmelo.
Yes. And Tony Parker. Yes, I would sub out Pierce, Tony Parker, and Dame with those 3 that you said, and I would be perfectly happy with that. I think it's a more legitimate list.
I mean, here's one thing that I don't think those 3 guys. George Mikan is 34 on this list.
Yeah.
No. He's the first great big man, but no, come on.
No,
this is back when we were shooting underhand.
But that's why I'm saying I think there's a bias in both directions. I think there was this desire to get some of these older guys in, and at the same time, there's this desire to get a Dame Lillard in towards the end. But then I think then there was also this desire to sort of forget about guys who faded at the end of their careers a little bit and are still playing, but were pretty damn good before then. And I'm not a Carmelo guy, but if you have Alex English on, you got to have Carmelo. And I'm not a Dwight guy necessarily, but Dwight may have deserved an MVP. He basically carried a team to the NBA Finals past LeBron at LeBron's peak in the playoffs.
Ooh, fun fact. Well, remember, we found this out after the fact, and in many ways you can make the case for this adding to LeBron's legend. Half that team was on PEDs.
I know. Well, Hedo and all the rest of them. Yeah, Hedo and Rashard. That's right. Well, I'm not going to say that Stan was feeding him out the back because we don't know that, but that was pretty.
Stan was busy forming a wall.
He was forming a wall. He was trying. Well, he was trying to keep Rafer away from whatever Rafer's issues were. All right, guys, this is great. We've got too long. Great stuff. Follow Ricky at Ricky J Marc. Obviously, follow Alex at Tropical Blanket. Check out our sponsors, as I mentioned, bankruptcyisgoodforyou.com and also christophersbakery.com/5 reasons. Spell it out and spell out 5 reasons for 15% off. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.